I'd like to now call on stage Ms. Flavia Agnes.
It gives me a great pleasure to be here amongst you this afternoon, just as this year is coming to an end. And I feel that I'm in the midst of many friends who have been co-travelers in this journey of empowering women. I know some very well, Chetna, for instance, Jokin, for instance, and we have worked together over a period of time, taking different issues. So I must thank Nija for spotting me and inviting me to be here in this panel on Heroes Speak. I would like to know from you what exactly you would like to know from me, because my life is so vast and I've lived more than 65 years and there's so many things I would like to share with you. But if I know your interest, that will help me to focus my presentation exactly on around those issues. Because I've done many things in my life. Of course, many things I have not done also. And one correction, it's not, Majlis is not a cultural center, it's a legal and cultural center. And the legal side works on women's rights. So anything particularly in your mind you have that you would like me to address? Any questions you have? Okay, any other? That's the most important question, I think, what motivates, I keep asking myself. Okay, and any other? Yeah, I was afraid that it got cut over there because the next sentence didn't come. So I was really afraid that the wrong message got through. I don't know where that video is from. Nowadays, nobody asks you for your CV and all. Everybody has everything available on the net. So everybody sort of compiles their own thing. I'm glad the message came through. Thank you very much for that. Okay, this I think more or less summarizes what would be the presentation. What does Majlis do? Let me start with that. We started in 1990. And there was my colleague who is a filmmaker, art coordinator, working on alternate culture, alternate filmmaking, etc. And myself, who was very keen to have a legal resource center for women, because one of the main problems I feel that women have and always have had is while we have many laws, we have laws for the asking. Any issue that you campaign, you ask for, government very easily gives you laws. But you do not know how to access those laws. So the laws are there and women are suffering, and unless you have a lot of money or a lot of contact, you cannot go to court. Because all of us, men and women, are very scared of courts. We are very scared of police. And there's a general feeling that women don't want to go to court. And yet, continuously, we as activists say, we need this law, we need that law. And the presumption being, if there's a law on paper, women will get their rights automatically. Not even awareness, consciousness, nothing. The law is there and we are very happy. And consistently, we as women's rights activists have asked for laws and government has given us the law. And every time a law has come about, we feel very elated, we feel a sense of achievement. Yet at a ground level, if you see year after year, we read in the newspaper, the law has not worked. If you see the statistics for Dowdy murder, for instance, every year the number goes up. You take the statistics for rape, every year the number goes up. If you look at the conviction rate, every year it drops. So what is it that actually, why do we want the law if we are not able to access it and if the law is not giving us rights? So with that, we started in 1990 because I feel court is a very important arena for rights. And women, not just rich women, not women from a particular class, but all women should be able to access the courts, need to know their rights, need to know where to go for the enforcement of their rights, and need to know, have the avenues chalked out for them. If you do like this, you will get your right. If you don't do like this, you will not get your right. Because law is not a magic wand that will change your life. It has to be strategized, it has to be accessed. And overall, since men have better access to resources, to an understanding of rights, if there's a problem in marriage, men are able to strategize much better than women. Women suddenly find themselves on the street and they don't know how to protect their rights. And this was my own experience. And I thought, and many of my friends also thought, if I become a lawyer, then I will understand. I will understand the law, I will understand women, and I will be able to make magic. So I became a lawyer much later. I became a graduate much later. I became a lawyer much later, only to practice on women's rights. But that was not enough. I had to be like really super specialist in my area, otherwise nobody would take me seriously. And in order to be recognized by society, women have to surpass men to understand that you are really legal authority. So I did my LLB, I did my LLM, I did my MPhil, I wrote many books, Family Law, Volume 1, Volume 2, which are now prescribed textbooks for many law colleges. And then we have these kind of books, defending women's rights for domestic violence, sexual violence, Muslim women's rights. So you had to constantly not only write books, write in the paper, make people understand that you know what you're talking about. Only then the Judicial Academy will call you, somebody else will call you, oh, she knows what's her stuff. Otherwise, what people say, oh, they are feminists. You know, they're screeching loudly and they don't understand law actually. They don't understand courts, you know, the sanctimonious space of courts and litigation. So you have to prove yourself. Have important cases fought, they're recorded, they're reported, have a bulk of cases actually, have an entire legal center where lots of women work, and we have an all-women team of lawyers. Again, we have a misconception that when you say, I need a lawyer, what you think is a very elderly, pot-bellied maybe gentleman that sits with his specs, and you think only he knows law. Never mind what law he practices. Maybe he's just doing conveyances. But you think because he's got a law degree, he will be expected to know every single type of law. We don't think that for doctors, in fact. We say, oh, he is specialist in eyes, somebody's heart, somebody's brain, somebody's gynecologist. But we just think lawyer means lawyer. A lawyer will know. And we get so many cases that are messed up even by the best of lawyers. And in our office, even the least of my juniors who has just passed out and come can fight a case against a very well-established lawyer and win. And I think that's the strength of the organization. And for us, it doesn't matter whether the client is rich or poor. We don't look at cases as an income-generating avenue to prolong the cases for years and years so that we keep getting money. We do charge clients who can afford, but we also do not charge clients who can't afford. But the whole idea is to provide quality legal services to everyone. So this is the aim in which we started. And we have worked on for about 20 years, 1991 we started. But in 2011 we started a very important project which is not said here, providing support to victims of sexual violence. Much before the Delhi gang rape case. This happened of a 4-year-old girl who was raped in her own, in a school by the school watchman. And the school happened to be next to our office. And that time we were not doing criminal law, we were only doing civil law, Domestic Violence Act, maintenance, divorce, etc. And most of my writings have been on that area. But also I'm involved with the anti-rape movement of the 80s. I read a lot of High Court, Supreme Court judgments, but we had not, and written a lot about it, but not actively intervened in a criminal court. So when this case came and we read in the papers, and already there were stories that a woman is insane, or she is exploiting the school management, she's asking for 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs settlement, etc., etc. And we read it and I felt that this woman is in grave trouble. She doesn't know what she's in for. She's gone and complained to the police. She's an illiterate migrant mother who's come from Bihar. This is the first generation literate child in her family. How is she going to negotiate with this whole entire criminal legal system where the accused will have some high profile lawyer? So we approached this woman. We invited her, and her first request was, I need a lawyer, I need a good lawyer. Because she was not ready to believe that any of us know law, all women. She said, can you put me to some lawyer? I'm even ready to pay. But we said, we are lawyers and we will help you, and we had to really convince that we understand the law, we understand the courts, and we helped. And 2 years we fought this case, and nobody had faith in this case because for 3 days the police had not even registered the complaint. Only when she went to a public hospital, the public hospital asked the police to record the complaint. So already there was delay. Or the medical was not done properly. So there was nothing on straightaway on the record that would have helped to get about conviction. Yet we very systematically followed the case. But what we did was explain to the mother every step of the case, what is going to happen, bail application, charge sheet being filed, what is examination, what is cross-examination, what is written in the FIR, what she has to reply in court. Now, just providing that support so she's not scared. Imagine an illiterate mother going to a sessions court and deposing in the court without knowing what is written in her papers. Or imagine a 4-year-old child being cross-examined. And if you know the criminal legal setup, the other side lawyer was a very well-known criminal lawyer, Majid Memon, who defends all terrorists, etc. High-profile lawyer, highly paid. So how did the school watchman actually get the money to engage him? So it was not the school watchman, it was the school management. Because for the school, it was a reputation. So at every date, the management, the principal, everybody would be there in the court. And against this illiterate mother and this small child, asking for justice. Because we believe that if you go to police, we will get justice. But ultimately, and that was before the law got amended, before the rape law actually had that kind of public media publicity. But despite that, you know what happened? And it was so difficult in those days to get information from the police, get FIR copies, etc. Because they would all make it very secretive, very non-transparent. Nobody could access this document. Under the under the guise of protecting the victim, you're actually protecting the state administration by not making it transparent. We fought our way gradually by police station. Many organizations started referring cases to us where they were ready for trial, etc. So, after 2012 Delhi gang rape, we could see a marked change. Because the state administration met such a flack, nationally and internationally, there were protests, etc. after the Delhi gang rape. Suddenly doors started opening. State administration was much more welcoming. Judiciary was much more welcoming. He said, yeah, please come, please help us. We'll be very happy to cooperate with you. The police were welcoming, the WCD was welcoming, the courts were welcoming. And that was a change that was brought about. And today we have followed up around 350 cases, studied the judgment, understood what the trial court scenario is like. And according to us, if you support the victim and if you help her and guide her, your conviction rate will improve. Your conviction rate will not improve with the death penalty. Because stricter the conviction, higher the conviction rate will be low. Because if there is the smallest of the doubt in the judge's mind, judge will not convict, judge will acquit. But what is needed is that much more certainty that in most cases there will be a conviction. And why the conviction? Because there is somebody to support this child or this woman as she goes through the process. What happens when there is acquittal? Generally, it is presumed to be a false case. While at one level we think rape is here, rape is happening everywhere, etc. If you see at the end of the conviction, if there is acquittal, at end of the trial, if there is acquittal, then we dub all of them as false cases. And women are misusing the law. Next immediately we want this law, we want that law to be stringent, death penalty to be there. Next breath we say, see how this law is misused. So this is the level at which our understanding of law is. And this is a small example I want to give you. There was a case where a 13-year-old girl who is a school dropout because her parents are so poor, her mother is a domestic maid, Her father is a watchman, but he's alcoholic, so half the time he doesn't work. This girl was lured for going to a party by her friend, who's 3 years older. And when she went there, she was given something to drink, and 4 boys, including the one who's celebrating his birthday, as well as the 3 others, raped her. When she gained consciousness, she was without clothes and she was in acute pain. Still, they were not allowing her to leave, but somehow she dressed up, she came out, and she reached home and she was bleeding, and her mother saw her and admitted her in the hospital. Some NGO also came, rushing, something else, whatever. The girl was taken to the rescue home, and in the same rescue home, the other girl who is accused was also put in the same home, and this girl got beaten up by that other girl in the same home. So she had to be released. She came home, etc. At the time of trial, this child turned hostile. This girl was brought to court by the accused lawyer on every date. And the judge kept asking that, what is your interest? Why are you bringing this girl to the court? The girl wouldn't talk to us because we did not meet her at the first entry, because some other NGO is following up the case. And finally, it was acquittal. And this happened in the same week as the conviction and death penalty in the Shakti Mills case. And the accused were released, and they are in the same area. And this girl is also in the same area. It happens. What to be done? But about 6 months later, there is an article in the Times of India which says that how this new law on child sexual abuse is misused. And the journalists give this example of acquittal. So I wrote to the journalist and I wrote a piece in some other paper. 13-year-old girl is gang raped and there is acquittal. Instead of saying this, it is the state responsibility, you are saying this is a false case. Case is filed by the hospital. Imagine how easily we put the blame on women that they are filing false cases. And we all the time are fed on that diet. One level we say rape is horrible, rape is this, rape is that. So according to me, the answer to your question, how can death penalty be an answer? So to reformulate it, what we say, the victim support is the answer. As one of the things that we have done in our work, we have provided, we have pressurized the state to bring in a financial support scheme for rape victims. And today that scheme is in order. It came in force on 2nd October 2013. It's there in all the district. And district compensatory boards have been set up under the collector, where head of different departments like health, the prosecution, police, etc. have to be together, and one NGO member. And they will discuss each and every FIR. And then if there's FIR, if there's medical, the compensation is sanctioned immediately. And not after conviction, but after the FIR. And this is a very innovative scheme. And according to me, this is one of the smaller victories, that we actually were able to get this, some amount for this girl's reintegration into the society. It's not a compensation for rape, but I would call it a financial support scheme for a child who cannot go to the same school. Her parents cannot stay in the same area because there's so much stigma attached. Everybody knows this child has been raped. Sometimes she's pregnant, sometimes she gets HIV or AIDS. She has multiple, firstly she's got already multiple vulnerabilities. She's out of school, she's poor, etc. The rape, in fact, adds on these vulnerabilities. And the trial process makes her even more vulnerable. So this is to help her to tide over that journey. So what makes me, what keeps me going? You know, we have this organization where many young people come and join, many young girls who pass their law. And you know how law nowadays has become very lucrative. You get, either you go abroad to study, or you get jobs in all corporate firms, etc. Law has become a very, very sort of highly sought profession. So into this, the girls who choose to work with me and work with so much dedication I did a family law under Domestic Violence Act or Sexual Violence Act. Work for long hours, much more than any corporate job. And work, one day if we don't go to court, something will fall, something will go amiss, etc. Work with complete dedication. There are a lot of children who want to intern with us from various very prestigious law colleges. For me, I think the only thing that keeps me going is this group of young, enthusiastic people who have faith in me, who have faith in the work that Majlis is doing, have faith in what Majlis has done in the last 20 years. And I think that is our strength, and that is the only strength we have. We don't have financial backing. We go project to project with small grants, some donations, etc. But that fact that people know about our work, the fact that I get invited here to speak, for instance, people want to hear me. The courts, the judges take our work very seriously. It's not easy to get an order, but we work very hard to get those orders. And every time, even a smallest of order comes, we feel really, really happy. And each time, even my juniors, when they feel one child, one woman getting their rights, I think that's what keeps us going. Thank you. This is my autobiography book. I've got 2 copies, but in case you give your names to ma'am and have a list, we can send the books across. They cost 100 rupees, and you want to know my story, you can read this book, not borrow from each other. My request is you must buy your own copy because it's only 100 rupees. People say, no, you keep it out. They said, we are finished reading because we took the book from there and we read it. So that's not the point. It's not a story to read. It's a book that you should own, you should give others. It will always be very inspirational. And many of you will know somebody who will be inspired and who will be able to change their life by reading this book, which is my own story, which was written in 1984, exactly 30 years ago. And that's what is important, that if you read it, you will think it's written today. Despite all our consciousness, all our effort, all the laws, nothing much has changed. So why it becomes relevant even today? It's sad that it's relevant even today, because you should be feeling like it's 16th century, 17th century story. It doesn't happen anymore. My God, in those days it used to be like this. But that's not the case. It is the case of a woman, middle class, educated, English speaking, and suddenly when domestic violence hits her, physical violence, etc., you don't know what to do. And you think something is wrong with you, you try to change your life, but it's not possible to change. Everybody says it's your fault, it's your fault. And you raise these children in this extremely violent atmosphere. And that's the story, that what is it? Because until I wrote my book, most of the time we used to think violence is either rape or dowry death. So when there is violence, immediately they say, is there a mother-in-law? Is your husband alcoholic? Is this, is that? And nothing of the sort is there. And yet every day you are getting beaten, or the threat of violence is there. And again, just like rape, there was stigma at the time. At least now the stigma has become much less. Though stigma is still there. And women take like 20, 30 years to talk about domestic violence, something that happens to them every day. It's not only domestic violence physically, it's mental violence, it's economic violence, it's sexual violence, it's a combination of all kinds of violence. So in 1980, when anti-rape movement first started against a particular rape case, and I think I should tell you about that case, there was a Supreme Court judgment. There was a 16-year-old girl who was raped in a small village in Maharashtra in 1972. She was raped by the policeman. She was orphan, she was tribal, she was poor, she was working in somebody's house as a maidservant, and that a young boy in that house had usko bagaya, has induced her into elopement. Then the brother filed a complaint and she was taken to the police station. There the policeman on duty raped her. But the positive point is there the lady in whose house she works, the boyfriend, the husband believed her that she's raped. And all the villagers in that small village came together in the night and they pressurized the police to record the FIR. When that FIR was recorded, and they said, if you don't record it tonight, we will burn down that police station. And that was how much support was there at that time, whereas it's not there even today. Even your friends will not believe you, even your parents will not believe you. They'll ask you, what is it that you did? They'll try to suppress because of stigma, because of various things. Important thing is the rape case got recorded. The Sessions Court acquitted. Why? Well, they said the girl is not of good character. And there were no injuries on her body. Only without consent we call it rape. Otherwise it is consent means there is no rape. And if you did not consent, then there should be marks of injury on your body. You should fight. Because judges believe that virginity is the most precious possession of a girl. And she'll fight till she dies, not to get raped. And this girl did not fight so much, and she must have been so scared that there was no possibility of fighting. So the judge acquitted her, the policeman. Surprisingly, the state filed an appeal. It went to Nagpur High Court, Nagpur Bench of High Court, and those judges convicted the accused and said, a quiet acquiescence is not consent. That means you were unable to fight. And today also I'll tell you, I don't know how many of you will be able to fight if you're taken to the police station and then raped. What will you do? So this is something we really need to understand. So the High Court said, quiet acquiescence is not consent, consent has to be voluntary, etc. Convicted the policeman. Policeman went to Supreme Court. What do you think would have happened? Now we have two judgments, Session judgment and High Court judgment. What would the Supreme Court do? Acquitted? Convicted? It should be conviction, right? You must understand Supreme Court verdict is the law of the land. What the Supreme Court says, everybody has to follow. You can make a law through the legislature or you can make the law through the Supreme Court. Supreme Court acquitted. Upheld the Sessions Court judgment. Confirmed that this girl is a liar and she has made up this whole story. Confirmed that marks of injury are essential on the body to prove non-consent. And against this, we had the first anti-rape movement where many of us were part of it. And it was coming in the newspapers, etc. From my situation, for me it's a very important landmark case, not only for the anti-rape movement, but also for my own life. Because first time women's groups started forming and started discussing issues of violence against women. And I joined this group, not because of my own problem, because I thought, I should be associated with something of this nature which will help me. And that is how I wrote my first version, because when people asked me why I joined, then I said, you don't have, and we were following up a case that happened in a small village in Turbe. Now Turbe, that time Turbe was very far. Turbe is not so far actually, Navi Mumbai. Similar situation, and I was part of the process of going and finding out what happened to this girl. So in the process, I wrote my own story. And then people were so shocked that domestic violence happens, etc. And there is stigma that people say, oh, she's a battered woman. Oh my God, like she speaks English, but she's battered. Can you imagine? So people had all kinds of misconceptions. So you had to endure all that. In 1984, it came in this form. And that time I started something called Women's Center, a support center for women who are battered. I was with it till 1986. Then I joined other groups. One of them is Spark, where I met Joaquin and others to do other kind of work. Then I became, and that's when I studied, because I wanted to be a lawyer. Because I knew how difficult it was to access the courts and access your rights. Because I felt most lawyers are not understanding what you're trying to say. So that was my urge to become a lawyer. After I became a lawyer, then it was very important to start an organization, a dedicated, non-commercial kind of lawyering to help women. And then the story continued. Got one copy and the 2 copies of the autobiography. One is on the rights of Muslim women, one is on the sexual violence, and one is on domestic violence. very reasonably priced, 200, 250, and autobiography is 100 rupees. In case you all want copies, please write to me and we'll have it sent here. Because you will not get these books in bookstores, and it is very important reading material, written in very simple language for students, for teachers, for law teachers, judges, lawyers, etc. Thank you.